Kentucky, October 26, 1993. The air, crisp and biting, carried the scent of decaying leaves and distant wood smoke, a harbinger of the deep Appalachian winter, soon to descend upon the Daniel Boone National Forest. Dawn had yet to fully break, but a thin, pearlescent light was already bleeding across the eastern horizon, painting the sky in muted shades of lavender and bruised plum. Inside, a sturdy, albeit well-worn canvas tent pitched precariously close to the banks of a tributary feeding the Rockcastle River. 4 college students from Western Kentucky University were still deep in the throes of sleep, unaware that the gentle rhythm of their slumber was merely a prelude to an unforeseen, cataclysmic disruption. This was meant to be a weekend of unfettered adventure, a brief, invigorating escape from the suffocating routine of lecture halls and fluorescent-lit libraries. Sarah Jenkins, a 20-year-old art history major with a vibrant laugh and an even more vibrant mane of fiery red hair, was curled tightly in her sleeping bag, a well-read copy of Wuthering Heights lying open beside her, its pages fanned out by the subtle, cool currents of the morning air that seeped through the tent's mesh. Across from her, Mark Harrison, a pre-med student whose meticulous nature extended from his lab notes to the precise knotting of his hiking boots, lay perfectly straight, his breathing even and deep. He was the planner, the one who had checked the weather forecasts incessantly, packed the emergency first aid kit with professional-grade precision, and navigated their battered Ford Explorer over miles of winding, unpaved logging roads to this secluded spot. Beside Mark, 21-year-old Emily Chen, a philosophy student with an uncanny ability to dissect complex arguments and an equally uncanny penchant for finding humor in the most mundane situations, was nestled against her boyfriend, David Miller, a ruggedly handsome English literature major who possessed an easygoing charm and a deep love for the untamed wilderness. David had been the instigator of this particular excursion, his passion for the outdoors infectious, his knowledge of the local flora and fauna encyclopedic. Their campsite, a small, relatively flat clearing surrounded by a dense canopy of ancient oaks and towering pines, felt utterly isolated, a tranquil haven far removed from the clamor of civilization. A small fire pit, its embers long extinguished, sat at the center of their makeshift commune, a mute testament to the previous evening's laughter, shared stories, and the comforting crackle of burning wood. The cooler, still mostly full of provisions, stood sentinel near the edge of the clearing, a testament to their youthful optimism and the expectation of more days to come. A pair of hiking boots, caked with the red Kentucky mud of yesterday's trek, lay forgotten outside the tent flap, their laces untied. A thermos, still half filled with lukewarm coffee from the early hours of the morning, rested on a nearby fallen log, steam no longer rising from its opening. The silence of the forest was profound, broken only by the chirping of unseen crickets and the distant murmur of the river. It was a silence that, in retrospect, would be deemed pregnant with an impending, unimaginable horror. The innocence of that morning, the sheer banality of those waking moments, would forever be seared into the collective memory of a small community, a chilling contrast to the unimaginable events that were about to unfold, irrevocably altering the trajectory of numerous lives. The sun continued its slow ascent, casting long, distorted shadows through the dense tree cover, dappling the forest floor with shifting patterns of light and shade. A squirrel, emboldened by the lack of human activity, scampered across a branch overhead, dropping an acorn with a soft thud onto the tent's fabric, a sound that would later be recalled with agonizing clarity by those who sought to piece together the fragments of that fateful day. This particular corner of the Daniel Boone National Forest, while popular with seasoned hikers and local hunters, was not generally frequented by casual campers, a fact that had appealed to David's desire for true wilderness immersion. They had chosen this spot precisely for its remoteness, its promise of an unspoiled communion with nature, a brief respite from the ever-present hum of modernity. The irony would be a bitter pill to swallow. The details of their last known hours, before the world descended into chaos, were meticulously reconstructed, almost obsessively so, by investigators in the years that followed. They had arrived late Wednesday afternoon, October 25th, setting up camp with the easy efficiency of practiced outdoors enthusiasts. Thursday had been spent exploring a network of winding trails, discovering a hidden waterfall, and sharing stories around a crackling bonfire as the stars, unobscured by city lights, blazed with an almost supernatural intensity above them. Emily had described the experience in a postcard to her younger sister, writing, "It's so beautiful here, like another world." David found a new constellation, and Mark cooked the best campfire chili. "Wish you were here." This postcard, postmarked the day before their disappearance, would become a haunting artifact, a poignant glimpse into a happiness that was brutally curtailed. David had been particularly animated that evening, recounting local legends of moonshiners and forgotten pioneer settlements, his voice echoing softly through the darkened woods. Sarah had sketched a quick charcoal drawing of the fire, its flickering flames illuminating the faces of her friends, a fleeting moment of beauty captured on paper. Mark had meticulously cleaned up their dinner remnants, packing away all food items in animal-proof containers, ever the pragmatist, ever the responsible one. Emily and David had simply sat, their shoulders touching, lost in the quiet intimacy of the wilderness night. Their conversations had ranged from the mundane anxieties of upcoming exams to their grand, idealistic plans for the future. Sarah's dream of curating an art gallery, Mark's aspiration to become a surgeon, Emily's ambition to teach philosophy at a small liberal arts college, and David's hope of publishing a collection of nature essays. These were young lives brimming with potential, with the boundless optimism that only youth can truly possess. The forest, in its vast indifference, had listened to their hopes and dreams, silently holding the secret of what was to come. The first sign that something was amiss would not register until well after the morning's initial tranquility had given way to the full, insistent brightness of the day. The sun by then had climbed higher, its golden rays piercing through the forest canopy, igniting the dew-kissed leaves in a spectacular display of autumnal color. A small stream, fed by mountain springs, gurgled softly nearby, its waters clear and cold. Birds, now fully awake, chirped and sang, their melodies weaving a complex tapestry of sound. It was the sort of perfect autumn day that poets write about, a day meant for leisurely hikes, warm cups of coffee, and the simple joy of companionship. Yet in this idyllic setting, an unsettling quiet had begun to settle over the campsite. By 10 o'clock that morning, the absence of activity was stark. The tent, though undisturbed, remained zipped shut. No tantalizing aroma of brewing coffee wafted through the air. No cheerful chatter or the clatter of breakfast preparations emanated from the clearing. The untouched thermos and the mud-caked boots outside the tent seemed to stand as silent sentinels, stark reminders of a presence that had abruptly vanished. A local hunter, 82-year-old Silas Blackwood, a man who had traversed every inch of this forest since he was a boy, was the first to stumble upon the anomaly. Silas, with his weathered face and eyes as keen as a hawk's, was tracking a deer he had wounded the previous day, following its faint trail of blood through the undergrowth. He had heard whispers of college kids camping in the area, a rare occurrence given the remoteness, but hadn't given it much thought. Now, as he rounded a bend in the winding deer trail, the sight of the deserted campsite brought him to an abrupt halt. An instinctive prickle of unease ran down his spine. It wasn't just the quiet, it was the quality of the quiet, an unnatural stillness that felt wrong in the vibrant, breathing forest. He observed the scene with a hunter's discerning eye, the still zipped tent, the unlit fire pit, the untouched cooler. No signs of a hasty departure, no scattered belongings indicative of a quick pack-up. It was as if the campers had simply evaporated into the thin autumn air, leaving behind only the ghost of their recent presence. Silas, a man of few words but sharp instincts, knew something was profoundly wrong. He cautiously approached the tent, calling out, "Hello? Anyone home?" His voice, usually gruff, sounded strangely small in the vast expanse of the forest. Only the echo of his own words returned. He unzipped the tent flap, peering inside. 4 sleeping bags lay neatly unrolled, still warm to the touch, as if their occupants had just moments ago risen. Personal items were scattered around, a paperback novel, a pair of eyeglasses, a half-finished crossword puzzle, a journal with a pen tucked into its pages. Everything was meticulously arranged, speaking to a sudden, inexplicable departure, not a planned one. The scene inside the tent was a tableau of suspended life, a silent testament to an ordinary morning that had been violently interrupted. The coffee in the thermos had long since grown cold. The chill that permeated the air inside the tent felt unnatural, a stark contrast to the deceptive warmth of the morning sun outside. Silas, with a growing sense of dread, backed away from the tent. He was a man accustomed to the solitude of the wilderness, to the quiet mysteries of nature, but this was different. This was a human mystery, a vacuum where 4 vibrant lives should have been. He knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that he had stumbled upon something terrible, something that would reverberate far beyond the quiet confines of this ancient forest. He turned and began the long, urgent trek back to his weathered Ford pickup, his mind racing, his heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. The nearest ranger station was miles away, accessible only by a gravel road that snaked through the rugged terrain. The communication would be arduous, slow, and by the time help arrived, precious hours, perhaps even days, would have been irretrievably lost. But Silas knew he had to report what he had seen, had to alert the authorities to the chilling emptiness that had swallowed 4 young souls whole. The forest, once a place of solace and adventure for the students, had now become a silent, ominous witness to their disappearance. The first official notification of the missing students reached the Kentucky State Police post in London, Kentucky, at precisely 2:14 p.m. on Friday, October 27, 1993. The call came from a breathless park ranger, relaying Silas Blackwood's unsettling discovery. Sergeant Rick Powell, a 38-year-old veteran detective whose career had been marked by a methodical approach and an unwavering commitment to justice, took the call. His initial assessment was tinged with a familiar weariness. Young people sometimes wandered off, got lost, or simply overstayed their welcome in the wilderness, only to reappear sheepishly hours later. Yet the ranger's description of the campsite, undisturbed yet utterly devoid of its occupants, resonated with an uncomfortable familiarity, a pattern that spoke not of youthful misadventure, but of something far more sinister. "No signs of struggle, you say? Nothing overturned? No evidence of animals?" Powell asked, his voice calm, belying the rapid calculations already taking place in his mind. The ranger confirmed the details, emphasizing the eerie neatness of the abandoned site. That detail, above all others, was a red flag. Wilderness disappearances often left traces, discarded gear, signs of a forced entry, or obvious disarray. This almost clinical absence was far more troubling. Within the hour, a small contingent of Kentucky state troopers, joined by a search and rescue team, began mobilizing. The autumn sun, once a comforting presence, now cast long, deepening shadows as the afternoon waned. The air grew colder, the wind picking up, rustling through the dry leaves with a sound like hushed whispers. By the time Sergeant Powell and his team reached the remote campsite, escorted by Silas Blackwood, dusk was beginning to creep in, bathing the forest in a somber, bruised twilight. The scene, illuminated by powerful searchlights and the glare of police cruisers parked precariously on the rough logging road, was meticulously documented. Forensic technicians, working quickly against the fading light and the dropping temperatures, scoured the area for any discernible clues. They photographed every inch of the campsite: the unzipped tent, the untouched cooler, the still warm sleeping bags, the abandoned personal effects. Every detail, no matter how small, was catalogued and bagged as potential evidence. A half-eaten granola bar, left on a log, was carefully collected. A single, intricately carved wooden bird, a small sentimental token belonging to Sarah Jenkins, was found tucked under her sleeping bag. It was a scene of suspended life, a frozen moment in time, a chilling portrait of a peace that had been brutally shattered. The initial search perimeter was established around the campsite, extending outwards in ever-widening concentric circles. Over the next 72 hours, the Daniel Boone National Forest, a vast expanse of rugged terrain encompassing hundreds of thousands of acres, became the focal point of a massive search operation. Local volunteers, park rangers, and specially trained search dogs joined the state troopers, meticulously combing through dense thickets, climbing steep ravines, and navigating treacherous waterways. The names of the missing students were broadcast across local news channels and radio stations: Sarah Jenkins, Mark Harrison, Emily Chen, David Miller. Their smiling faces, captured in hopeful yearbook photos and casual snapshots, stared out from hastily printed flyers tacked to bulletin boards in every gas station and general store for miles around. Their families, contacted in a series of agonizing phone calls, descended upon London, Kentucky, their faces etched with a profound, almost unbearable grief. Mrs. Jenkins, Sarah's mother, a woman who had always exuded an air of quiet strength, arrived with her husband, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen, clutching a framed photograph of her daughter, a vibrant smile frozen in time. Mr. and Mrs. Harrison, Mark's parents, sat stoically in the police station waiting room, their hands clasped together, their silence more eloquent than any words. The Chen family, a large, close-knit unit, flew in from California, their faces a mask of weary despair. David Miller's parents, both university professors, spoke to reporters with a measured academic gravity, yet their voices trembled with an underlying current of raw, unarticulated terror. The weight of their collective agony settled like a heavy shroud over the small rural community. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months, and still there was no trace of the 4 students. No footprints leading away from the campsite, no discarded clothing, no desperate cries for help echoing through the vastness of the forest. The search teams, weary and disheartened, eventually had to scale back their efforts. The weather turned colder. Snow began to fall, blanketing the forest in a pristine, unforgiving white. The leaves, once vibrant, now lay in sodden heaps beneath a layer of ice. The hope that had flickered so brightly in the early days of the investigation began to dim, replaced by a growing, pervasive sense of despair. The case, initially dubbed the Daniel Boone by the media, slowly, inevitably, began its descent into the chilling abyss of a cold case. The campsite, once a buzzing hub of forensic activity, was eventually dismantled. The yellow police tape, once a stark boundary between the known and the terrifying unknown, was carefully removed. The forest, in its timeless indifference, reclaimed its secrets, allowing the snow and ice to cover the ground where laughter had once echoed and dreams had been shared. Sergeant Rick Powell, however, refused to let the case simply fade into obscurity. It gnawed at him, a relentless ache in his professional conscience. The pristine condition of the campsite, the lack of any struggle, the seemingly vanished bodies, it all defied logical explanation. He had seen too many crime scenes, had encountered too many perpetrators to simply dismiss this as a tragic accident or a spontaneous disappearance. There was an intelligence behind it, a chilling calculation that spoke to a darker truth. The evidence, or lack thereof, became its own kind of evidence. He kept the case file on his desk, a thick, expanding binder filled with meticulously documented notes, witness statements, forensic reports, and the haunting photographs of the deserted campsite. He reviewed every detail, every grainy image, every inconclusive lead, searching for the elusive thread, the single piece of information that everyone else had overlooked. He interviewed Silas Blackwood repeatedly, poring over his observations, seeking new nuances in his recollection. He spoke to the families again and again, agonizing over their heartbreak, their unwavering belief that their children would somehow, miraculously, be found. He followed every tip, no matter how outlandish, dispatching officers to investigate potential sightings, phantom clues, and cryptic phone calls. Most of these leads led nowhere, dissolving into the swirling mist of rumor and speculation. The only substantial finding had been the discovery of an old, rusted hunter's knife, found several miles from the campsite by a local farmer during a spring thaw, 6 months after the disappearance. It was tested for DNA, for fingerprints, for any shred of connection to the students. The results were inconclusive. The knife, unremarkable in its age and condition, offered no answers, only deepened the mystery. It simply became another piece of the expanding, agonizingly incomplete puzzle. The frustration was a constant companion, a heavy weight that settled in his chest. How could 4 young people simply vanish without a trace? The forest, usually so revealing, so full of its own natural narratives, remained stubbornly silent, guarding its terrible secret with an impenetrable stoicism. The years passed, marked by the changing seasons and the relentless march of time. The parents of Sarah, Mark, Emily, and David aged visibly, their youthful vibrancy replaced by a profound, pervasive sorrow. Mrs. Jenkins, once so vivacious, became a shadow of her former self, her red hair streaked with premature gray, her laughter replaced by a quiet, often melancholic, sigh. The Harrisons dedicated their lives to raising awareness for missing persons cases, pouring their grief into advocacy, determined that no other family should endure such an agonizing limbo. The Chen family established a scholarship in Emily's name, a poignant tribute to her unfulfilled potential. David Miller's parents found solace in continuing their academic pursuits, but the light in their eyes had dimmed irrevocably. The Daniel Boone National Forest, once a place of natural beauty and recreation, became synonymous with the haunting memory of the missing students, a place where a terrible unanswered question lingered in the very air. Sergeant Powell, promoted to lieutenant, never abandoned the case. It became his personal albatross, the one unsolved puzzle that refused to release its hold. He kept the file in his office, no longer just on his desk, but in a locked cabinet, a testament to its enduring significance. He would pull it out on quiet evenings, long after everyone else had gone home, spreading the documents across his large oak desk, poring over them with a meticulousness that bordered on obsession. He saw the faces of the students in his dreams, their hopeful eyes gazing out from the faded photographs, silently pleading for answers. He imagined their last moments, trying to construct a narrative from the gaping void of information, each scenario more terrifying than the last. He learned everything he could about cold case forensics, attending seminars, reading journals, always seeking new avenues, new technologies that might one day shed light on the darkness. He knew that one day science would catch up, that the impossible would become possible. He held on to that sliver of hope with an unwavering tenacity, a beacon in the pervasive gloom. The turning point, when it finally arrived, came nearly 30 years after the student's disappearance, a testament to the relentless march of scientific progress and the unwavering dedication of a new generation of investigators. It was the spring of 2023, and the case of the Daniel Boone 4, long considered insurmountable, found itself on the desk of Detective Maya Rodriguez, a brilliant, tenacious investigator with a background in forensic anthropology and a passion for cold cases. Rodriguez had arrived at the Kentucky State Police in London with a mandate to tackle the district's most intractable mysteries. At 35, she possessed a sharp intellect and an uncanny ability to connect seemingly disparate pieces of information, a skill honed by years of studying human remains and the stories they told. The Daniel Boone 4 case file, with its voluminous reports and chilling lack of resolution, immediately captured her attention. The sheer emptiness of the crime scene, the almost surgical precision of the disappearance, resonated with a pattern she had observed in other similarly perplexing cases. She saw not a dead end, but a challenge, a complex puzzle waiting to be unraveled by the cutting-edge tools of modern science. Her first step was to revisit the original evidence, meticulously re-examining every item that had been collected 3 decades prior. The original forensic reports, while thorough for their time, were now antiquated. She focused particularly on the clothing and personal effects recovered from the tent, specifically a pair of Mark Harrison's socks, and the small, intricately carved wooden bird belonging to Sarah Jenkins. These items, carefully preserved in an evidence locker for 30 years, held the promise of a breakthrough. Modern DNA extraction techniques, far more sensitive than those available in 1993, could potentially yield genetic material from even the minutest traces of skin cells or bodily fluids. Rodriguez ordered a full reanalysis of these items, dispatching them to a state-of-the-art forensic lab in Richmond, Virginia, renowned for its expertise in touch DNA and degraded samples. The wait was agonizing, each passing day stretching into an eternity of anticipation. When the results finally came back, several weeks later, they were nothing short of a revelation. The lab reported a significant breakthrough. A partial DNA profile, unequivocally male, had been successfully extracted from the wooden bird. This was not Sarah's DNA, nor that of any of the other students. It was an unknown profile, a spectral presence that had lingered on the artifact for decades, waiting for the technology to finally give it a voice. The wooden bird, a sentimental item that had once been a source of comfort to Sarah, now held the key to unlocking the truth of her disappearance. This partial DNA profile, a complex string of genetic markers, was immediately uploaded to CODIS, the national DNA database, in the desperate hope of a match. Days turned into weeks, the database churning through billions of data points, comparing the unknown profile against those of convicted offenders and arrestees. The initial CODIS search yielded no direct hits, a familiar disappointment in many cold cases. But Detective Rodriguez, undeterred, had anticipated this possibility. She knew that not every perpetrator was in CODIS. The next logical step, a groundbreaking technique that was revolutionizing cold case investigations, was forensic genetic genealogy. This innovative approach involved uploading the unknown DNA profile to public genealogy databases, the same ones used by millions of people seeking to trace their ancestry. The hope was to find distant relatives of the unknown perpetrator, thereby building a family tree that could eventually lead to the identification of the suspect. It was a painstaking, labor-intensive process, requiring specialized training and an almost superhuman patience. Rodriguez enlisted the help of Eleanor Vance, a retired genealogist with a sharp mind and an encyclopedic knowledge of family trees, who had volunteered her expertise to law enforcement agencies across the country. Vance, working tirelessly from her home office, began the arduous task of constructing a family tree from the distant genetic matches provided by the public databases. It was like piecing together a massive, complex jigsaw puzzle, each genetic match a tiny fragment of a much larger, sprawling family history. She traced ancestral lines back for generations, identifying common surnames, geographical locations, and key family events. The work stretched over several months, a testament to the intricate nature of human lineage. Finally, after countless hours of meticulous research and cross-referencing, Eleanor Vance presented Detective Rodriguez with a potential family tree. It was a sprawling, intricate web of relationships, pointing to a small cluster of individuals living in rural Kentucky, not far from the Daniel Boone National Forest. At the very top of the suspected lineage, a name emerged: Arthur Sterling. Arthur Sterling. The name resonated with a chilling familiarity. He was a local, a seemingly unassuming man in his early 60s, a retired mechanic who had lived his entire life in the small town of Livingston, just a few miles from the forest. He was a respected member of the community, a churchgoer, a man who had often volunteered his time to local charities. He had a wife, 2 grown children, and several grandchildren. He was, to all outward appearances, a pillar of the community, the last person anyone would ever suspect of such a heinous crime. Yet the genetic genealogy pointed directly to him. The next step was to obtain a direct DNA sample from Arthur Sterling without arousing his suspicion. This required delicate, covert surveillance. Under the guise of a routine traffic stop for a minor infraction, officers collected a discarded coffee cup and a cigarette butt that Sterling had touched. These items were immediately rushed to the forensic lab for comparison against the DNA profile found on Sarah's wooden bird. The wait this time was almost unbearable, a tangible tension that hung in the air at the Kentucky State Police post. Detective Rodriguez, working closely with Lieutenant Powell, who had followed the case for 3 decades, felt a surge of both hope and trepidation. If the DNA matched, it would finally bring closure to a case that had haunted an entire community for generations. If it didn't, they would be back to square one, the frustrating cycle of hope and despair resuming its relentless rhythm. The call came late on a Tuesday evening, 2 weeks after the coffee cup and cigarette butt had been collected. The voice on the other end of the line, that of the lab director, was calm, almost understated, but the words carried the weight of 30 years of unanswered prayers. "Detective Rodriguez," the director began, "we have a match, a full, unequivocal match. The DNA from the wooden bird, the coffee cup, and the cigarette butt are from the same individual, Arthur Sterling." A profound, almost deafening silence settled over the room. Lieutenant Powell, who had been standing next to Rodriguez, his face etched with a lifetime of unresolved frustration, closed his eyes, a single tear tracing a path down his weathered cheek. 30 years of waiting, of searching, of carrying the weight of this unsolved mystery. And now, the truth, so long obscured by the passage of time and the cunning of a perpetrator, was finally brutally staring them in the face. Arthur Sterling, the man who had likely driven past the missing person flyers tacked to telephone poles, the man who had perhaps even offered his condolences to the grieving families, was the architect of their unimaginable pain. The arrest of Arthur Sterling occurred at precisely 6:30 a.m. on a crisp Wednesday morning, 24 hours after the DNA confirmation. A tactical team, moving with precision and silence, descended upon his modest home in Livingston, Kentucky. Sterling, roused from his sleep by the insistent pounding on his front door, opened it to find a phalanx of uniformed officers and plainclothes detectives, their faces grim, their purpose clear. He stood on his porch, a bewildered expression on his face, his gray hair disheveled, clad only in a faded bathrobe. He initially feigned confusion, attempting to deny any knowledge of the Daniel Boone 4, his voice trembling slightly. But when Detective Rodriguez, standing directly in front of him, calmly stated, "Mr. Sterling, we have your DNA," the carefully constructed facade crumbled. His eyes, usually placid, darted wildly, betraying a flicker of panic, a momentary lapse in the composure he had maintained for 3 decades. He was taken into custody without further incident, the handcuffs clicking shut around his wrists with a chilling finality. The news of Arthur Sterling's arrest reverberated through Livingston and the surrounding communities like a shockwave. The man everyone knew, the quiet mechanic, the pillar of the church, was now being accused of one of Kentucky's most enduring and horrific cold cases. Neighbors spoke of their disbelief, their absolute astonishment. "Art Sterling? No! That can't be right," one woman told a local reporter, her voice thick with incredulity. "He's always been such a good man, always willing to lend a hand." Another man, a lifelong acquaintance, simply shook his head, a look of profound betrayal etched on his face. "You just never know, do you? You never truly know what's hidden beneath the surface." The local church, where Sterling had been an usher for years, cancelled its Wednesday morning prayer service, the pastor struggling to reconcile the man he thought he knew with the monster now unveiled. The impact of the arrest on the families of the missing students was immediate and profound. Mrs. Jenkins, now frail but still possessing an indomitable spirit, collapsed into her husband's arms upon hearing the news, a lifetime of suppressed grief finally overflowing. Mark Harrison's parents, their faces pale and drawn, spoke to the media with a quiet dignity, expressing a bittersweet relief. "We finally have an answer," Mr. Harrison stated, his voice thick with emotion. "It won't bring Mark back, but at least we know. At least we can finally lay him to rest, in a way." Emily Chen's sister, now a grown woman with children of her own, wept openly during a televised interview, recalling the vibrant, intelligent sister she had lost so young. David Miller's parents, their academic reserve finally broken, spoke of the lingering trauma, the years of uncertainty, and the unexpected, almost disorienting feeling of finally knowing. The arrest, while bringing a measure of closure, did not erase the pain, nor did it bring back the bright futures that had been so brutally stolen. It simply shifted the landscape of their grief, replacing the agonizing question mark with a chilling, undeniable truth. Under intense interrogation, Arthur Sterling, initially defiant, slowly began to crack. He demanded a lawyer, of course, but the weight of the evidence, the undeniable DNA, and the relentless questioning from Detective Rodriguez and Lieutenant Powell chipped away at his carefully constructed wall of denial. The story, when it finally emerged in disjointed fragments, was a chilling testament to opportunistic violence and the cold, calculated effort to conceal a heinous crime. Sterling, it turned out, was a casual hunter and trapper who knew the Daniel Boone National Forest intimately. He had stumbled upon the students' campsite by chance on that fateful Thursday morning, October 27th, 1993. He had been checking his squirrel traps, moving silently through the dense undergrowth, when he spotted the tent. Curiosity, he claimed, had drawn him closer. He had seen the thermos of coffee, the half-eaten granola bar, the personal items scattered around. He had watched them sleep for a time, a disturbing detail that sent shivers down the spines of the investigators. His motive, he claimed, was not premeditated. It was, he insisted, a moment of madness, a sudden, uncontrollable impulse. He had entered the tent, finding the students still asleep. The details of what transpired next were horrifying, recounted by Sterling with a chilling detachment that defied belief. He had overpowered them one by one, using a combination of brute force and surprise. He admitted to the brutal murders of all 4 students, describing the sequence of events with a clinical precision that shocked even the most seasoned investigators. The wooden bird, Sarah's small, cherished possession, had been clutched in her hand during the struggle, a desperate attempt to protect herself, a final, poignant defiance. Sterling admitted to taking their bodies deep into the forest, burying them in a remote, unmarked grave he had prepared in advance, a spot known only to him, a location he had used for years to dispose of illegally poached game. He had then returned to the campsite, meticulously cleaning up any trace of the struggle, arranging their belongings to make it appear as if they had simply vanished, leaving no obvious clues behind. He had even, he confessed, spent several minutes wiping down the inside of the tent, removing his fingerprints, a testament to his chillingly methodical nature. He had then driven away, returning to his seemingly normal life, carrying the monstrous secret with him for 30 years, a ghost walking among the living. The revelation of the burial site was a profound moment for the families. Finally, after 3 decades of agonizing uncertainty, they would be able to bring their children home. A massive archaeological excavation was immediately organized, involving forensic anthropologists, cadaver dogs, and a team of dedicated volunteers. Sterling, under heavy guard, led the team to a remote, overgrown hollow, a place so dense with vegetation that it had remained undiscovered for all those years. It was a somber, deeply emotional day, as the remains of Sarah Jenkins, Mark Harrison, Emily Chen, and David Miller were carefully exhumed, their identities confirmed through dental records and DNA analysis. Their families were present, watching in heartbreaking silence as their children were finally brought forth from the earth, their long vigil drawing to a close. The forest, which had once been a site of terror, now became a place of mournful homecoming. The trial of Arthur Sterling was a media sensation, drawing national attention. The small courthouse in London, Kentucky was packed to capacity every day, with reporters, victim advocacy groups, and members of the local community vying for a seat. Sterling, now shorn of his grandfatherly facade, sat impassively throughout the proceedings, his face devoid of emotion, a blank canvas upon which the prosecution painted a chilling portrait of a calculated killer. Detective Rodriguez and Lieutenant Powell testified, recounting the intricate details of the cold case investigation, the groundbreaking DNA evidence, and Sterling's eventual confession. The families delivered powerful, tearful victim impact statements, describing the gaping void left by their children's disappearances, the decades of agonizing uncertainty, the dreams shattered, the futures stolen. Mrs. Jenkins, her voice trembling but resolute, looked directly at Sterling during her testimony, her gaze unwavering. "You stole my daughter," she said, her voice barely a whisper, yet resonating with an immense power. "You stole her future, her art, her beautiful, vibrant life, and for 30 years you walked among us, a wolf in sheep's clothing." The jury, after only a few hours of deliberation, returned with a verdict of guilty on all counts of murder. The courtroom erupted in a mixture of cheers and sobs. Justice, though long delayed, had finally been served. Arthur Sterling was sentenced to 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, a sentence that ensured he would spend the remainder of his days in a maximum security prison, a solitary figure consumed by his own monstrous deeds. The aftermath of the trial brought a strange, bittersweet form of closure to the community and the grieving families. The Daniel Boone Four were no longer just a cold case, a haunting mystery. They were Sarah, Mark, Emily, and David, vibrant young individuals whose lives had been tragically cut short, but whose story had finally been told. The community of Livingston struggled to reconcile the image of the benevolent neighbor with that of the cold-blooded murderer. It sparked difficult conversations about the nature of evil, the hidden depths of human darkness, and the deceptive masks that some individuals wear. The case served as a poignant reminder that danger can lurk in the most unexpected places, often hidden in plain sight. In the years that followed, Detective Maya Rodriguez continued her work on cold cases, her reputation as a relentless and brilliant investigator growing with each solved mystery. She often thought of the Daniel Boone Four, of the weight of their story, the 30 years of silence, and the ultimate triumph of science and persistence. Lieutenant Powell, finally able to close the case that had defined so much of his career, retired shortly after the trial, carrying with him the knowledge that he had seen justice delivered, even if it had taken 3 decades. He would often visit the memorial erected near the entrance to the Daniel Boone National Forest, a simple stone monument bearing the names of Sarah, Mark, Emily, and David. He would stand there in quiet contemplation, the wind rustling through the trees, carrying with it the whispers of a past finally laid to rest. The Daniel Boone National Forest, once a place of terrifying mystery, slowly began to reclaim its original identity as a place of natural beauty and solace. Hikers and campers, while still remembering the tragic story, returned to its trails and clearings, finding peace in its ancient trees and winding rivers. But for those who remembered the autumn of 1993, the forest would forever hold the echoes of laughter, abruptly silenced, and the chilling memory of a killer who had walked among them for far too long, his terrible secret buried deep beneath the earth, waiting for the relentless march of time and the unyielding power of science to finally bring it to light. The coffee in the thermos had long since grown cold, but the memory of the 4 young students and the justice finally served would forever remain etched in the heart of Kentucky.